Welcome to the Voices of Manufacturing, where business leaders across the country share their unique challenges and insights.
We want to help people within manufacturing and make them excited to come to work every day and go home safe to their family.
When you bring people in, they're anything but a machine. They're partners that can help you build your business, that can be your success if you treat them right.
It's almost like magic because it takes the learning process sometimes from weeks down to days, sometimes hours.
This podcast is brought to you by Dazuki, the premier frontline digital transformation solution that allows manufacturers to standardize operations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian Salee and Michael Mullenberg.
Hey, Michael, how you doing today?
Hey, Brian, doing well. On the road, traveling, visiting manufacturing sites, doing some training. So I'm all energized today. It's late in the day, but I just had a fabulous day. It's a great day to be in manufacturing.
I knew you weren't at home because your background is
Well,
definitely not the same.
Well, you've been busy lining up guests for us and sort of running the ship forward. So I'm really excited about the interview today and the topic we have. It's very, very close to my heart, and so thanks for setting this up.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to talk about it too because a few episodes ago, we had Chad Boutre on from the Manufacturing Institute, and the topic completed a survey where they surveyed a bunch of companies and employees in manufacturing and trying to understand what's important to them. And what they found is for employees, what the employees really want, they want to be engaged. They want a family-like environment. They want flexibility. Obviously, the compensation is important to them. But it was really interesting to see from their results how important it is for employers really to provide flexibility. A lot of that was like time off and things like that, like shorter shifts, maybe working 4 days a week, things like that. And what an employee was looking for in a job has changed a lot over the past decade. And that's where our guest today, Thomas Davis, really comes into play here. Thomas has been in the industry for 10 years, and he's going to actually be able to provide a lot more detail on what employees are looking for today. So welcome to the show, Thomas.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Well, Thomas, tell us a little bit about your background. I know you've been in the industry for a while. I met you, I don't know how many years ago. And I remember the first time I met you, I was like, oh, these guys really know what they're talking about with training. Cause you guys were talking about, I think, what was it? The 4x4,
4x4,
four operators,
4 jobs, 4 operators for every job, 4 jobs for every operator. Absolutely. That's such a great concept. I still try to use that today. But my background, honestly, training, as it does to so many of us, came at me accidentally. I had been in the restaurant industry for years, running restaurants, division manager of restaurants, those sorts of things. And then I started opening restaurants. And in that, I started training all of the new staff. And when you work in restaurants, you're kind of always training, right? Because you're getting these 16, 15-year-old kids who it's their first job. So you have to train them everything from how to be an employee to how to clock in to how to wash their hands, like you the gamut. So when you're in the restaurant industry, you're always sort of in training. So I kind of realized I had an aptitude for that. And then basically at that point, any sort of food you can think of, I have touched, manufactured, distributed it, added it to the supply chain, taken it out of the supply chain. I worked in food distribution for a long time. I've worked in human food manufacturing. I've worked in pet food manufacturing. So I've never done anything mechanical. So nothing like automotive, nothing where I was building something. It's always been consumption based.
Yeah. So you're, and what I've always found is I always call, process manufacturing is what you just listed there, right? That falls into that bucket of process manufacturing. And I've always found, and I think most people have found this as well, is training makes all the difference in that industry because you're asking those operators and those technicians to do a wide variety of roles. And you really have to make sure that, they're not doing the same thing, a repetitive thing over and over. And so training is so important there. But I'm curious, as we jump right into this, you've been in it for so long. What's changed over the last decade? What are some of the shifts that you're noticing?
So some of the big shifts that have changed are the expectations of the worker, what they expect when they come in. They, gone are the days where you popped in the video cassette and played the orientation video. That's not a reality anymore. A much more digital workforce now. We use a lot of technology in our onboarding processes that we didn't use before. A lot more multilingual orientations are happening today than were happening 10 years ago. And honestly, when I think about like a much bigger focus on employee engagement, safety culture, and quality culture. It seemed not that this was necessarily the case, but 10 years ago, the conversations around safety were a middle kind of thought. They weren't really at the forefront. And now that's sort of changed to where like safety is always at the forefront of every conversation. And career pathing is a big one when they come in. 10 years ago, I wasn't talking to an hourly associate about, what their life could be like with us in 10 years ever. And now it's one of the first conversations I have with everyone when they walk through the door. What are you interested in? What do you want to do? Where can you see yourself? How can I help you get there? These are the types of conversations that I'm having now.
Well, great. I want to dig into a little bit here further on some of these
Absolutely.
trends that you're noticing. As we were kind of preparing for the episode, you had laid out three that fall into the trends that you've noticing. But the first one I thought was really interesting because this tied back to that episode I mentioned with the Manufacturing Institute, the flexibility piece. What are you seeing when it comes to flexibility? Because it's kind of a newer concept. And I don't think a lot of manufacturers have adjusted to this just yet.
They have not adjusted to this yet. We haven't seen a lot of change in this area at all. But I think in the future, the companies who are going to win are going to figure this. They're going to figure this piece out, and it means a bunch of things, right? It means shorter work days. It means adjusted schedules, not a straight Monday through Friday 9 to 5. Sometimes people want to work a split shift, right? They want to work 4 hours in the morning, go be able to pick up their kids from school, spend a couple of hours with them, and then maybe go back for 4 hours that evening after the kids have gone to bed. They want to work 4 10-hour shifts as opposed to 5 8-hour shifts, or they want to work 3 12. It's really about giving them the autonomy to be able to lay out some piece of their schedule. If everyone's always expected to come in at 6 a.m., that doesn't give a lot of flexibility in someone's life. If they can't come in at 6 a.m., what are they supposed to do? So then what happens is they jump, right? They go somewhere where they can get that. But this flexibility piece is huge, and we're seeing it rear up in a bunch of ways. I'm sure you both remember, even probably 10 years ago when you hired people on, there was always well, you need to be here for a year before you accrue any vacation time, or a year before you have any sick time given to you. In today's worker, that's just not what they're interested in. They need days off. They're interested in mental health days. They're interested in set holidays and floating holidays. They want to be able to use the time the way that they want to use them, as opposed to having someone say, these are the prescriptives and you have to follow these.
Yeah, and Thomas, I want to go back here because I'm curious, and this is where we did this conversation with the Manufacturing Institute. There wasn't really any detail on maybe by age group what employees want. I'm curious, the flexibility piece, are you mostly seeing that with folks who are at the age where they may have children? Or are you seeing it across, the full spectrum of ages?
So we're seeing it less in the older generations. There's the mindset there is still, you come in and you work your shift, and that's how it is. When I was 17 or 18 years old, I never thought about asking if I could work a different time than they told me to. And that's not the case anymore. The new worker is asking the question, like, well, why do I have to come in at this time? Like, would it be okay if I came in at this time? Like, what's going to change? Like, what would change? Can I swap my shift with this person? And can they work Saturday and I can work Sunday? They really want to have those conversations. And I would say that right now, like, that's from age, new in workforce at 18, up till probably around like 45 or 50 or so, is they're all starting to ask those same kind of questions. But it's definitely the driving force is definitely the new in workforce. Like that's where it's permeating from.
It's really interesting, Thomas, this definition of flexibility, the time, the hours, the split shift. I hadn't even really heard much of that one. I don't know if that's a big trend or not, but sounds like an interesting request. My mind flashed back to flexibility was more like what you started out talking about, cross training. I want to have flexibility in what the work I do.
Mhm.
And an operations manager would say, I want to flex who does the work, because I have this 4x4 cross train matrix. So I think the definition of flexibility has kind of changed. Now we're talking flexing hours, shifts, maybe work responsibility a little bit,
Mhm.
but it's more in balancing the work time, the free time, and a personal schedule.
It's definitely a huge part of the conversation is how they can balance their personal schedule with prescribed work hours. Um,
You know,
how do they, we've been talking about work life balance for years, decades probably, right? Uh, but this is workforce coming in, they're really putting that into action. Like
yeah, they are.
they are focused, and I don't think we're going to change the worker. So I think that we're going to have to change the way that we work.
Yeah. So, Thomas, in your view, then, I mean, what are you seeing, I guess, at your company and then maybe some other companies as well? Is this something you guys are gearing up to support this type of flexibility so you can attract and retain these
What I
younger workers?
what I have seen right now, from a bunch of different manufacturers is, all options are on the table, right? Like the retaining the next wave of workers. How do we do that? I think the conversations are just now starting to ramp up to the point where we're going to see some real change in the next 5 years. Again, I don't think anyone's doing it well yet, but I think that they know that the conversation is going to happen, and they're trying to get ready for that.
Yeah. That I was going to say, I haven't seen too many companies that are doing it well yet either. I did see an article on a RV, kind of like a custom RV manufacturer. They went to a 4-day work week and the employees just love it. So they're doing
Hmm.
410s.
Yep.
But they can do that because it's custom high end RVs, but maybe a
Hmm.
little bit harder to do if you're producing food products or things like that.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely. Go ahead.
I was going to say, even the example of temporary workforce agencies of building schedules and software and cross training so that employers can say, I need somebody from 8 to noon, and they
Hmm.
bring in a temporary employee, onboard them, and it's mutual whether they come back. But this outside agency actually helps identify, get the parameters, kind of build the system, and the employer is really just a customer of that system. So I think that's evolving, that's catching on as well. Have you had experience with that? Third party, talent agencies focused on the flexible schedule?
So I've worked with it less in the last few years. Typically, like when I am bringing in a third party, like outside, is when we're looking for, like individualized tasks, like something that we don't have to train very much for, something that we can
Yes.
say, please do this for the next 8 hours, and that's how they can do it. That's really what we're looking for when I'm looking at a third party employer bringing someone else in. But honestly, like I haven't seen it as much in the last few years as it used to be very prevalent,
Yeah.
and it still may be. Maybe it just doesn't cross my path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the ability to attract and onboard those people, and then flex at the same time. I mean, that's all part of the equation we're talking about here.
Yes.
Well, well, Thomas, I want to go to the next one. I think everybody understands flexibility pretty well. Michael and I have talked about it a lot. I think we've probably done 3 or 4 episodes on this topic. We even had one where it was the Kawasaki. They manufacture small engines, and they hired a bunch of college students, college football players to come in and work for a short shift during the summer. And it was just a perfect example of like, well, how can we add additional capacity in a flexible
Hmm.
way to meet
Yeah.
the requirements of like this one group of individuals. And I just thought that was so creative. And hopefully we'll see a lot more of that. I'm curious though, compensation, this is a big one. And
Sure.
we all, I mean, I believe, and I've seen it, that most manufacturing frontline employees have been underpaid for a long time.
Hmm.
You've got CEOs making these massive salaries and bonuses and stock option plans. And then you've got this guy on the front line working his butt off and he's making $15 an hour. I'm curious, what has changed when it comes to compensation in terms of the expectations that employees have?
It's a huge one, right? And it goes back again to the work-life balance. They want to be able to work as few hours as possible, but be able to maintain a life outside of work. And I don't get the gut feeling that these people coming in are, they're not looking to get rich. They're looking to hang out with their kids, and like they're looking to make it to the school play and to the baseball game. They want to be compensated to live their life so they don't have to have 2 or 3 jobs in order to pay rent and have a kid and have a movie night once a week, they're looking for they're looking for a compensation that is tied to the area in where they live as well, right? If you live in Denver, say, the pay probably shouldn't be the same as if you worked in Fort Dodge, Iowa. There should be some reflection there, that person maybe gets paid a little bit more because where they're living costs a little bit more to live there. So that's a huge piece of it. Another thing that companies are starting to talk about, which I think is extremely smart of them, they're starting to talk about total compensation packages. When you have someone new in the workforce, 18, 19 years old, they don't always understand what a 401k is. And they don't always understand what a comprehensive medical package is or why that's important. So companies are now starting to talk about how the entire package looks for them, a new employee, as opposed to just, well, here's your $13 an hour, and like leaving the back end all in the back end. They're really starting to embrace this idea of, well, not only are you getting $13 an hour, but there's also this foundation that we've built for you to stand on as well.
Are you seeing companies actually put a dollar value to those, medical insurance benefit that they're receiving, is worth $16,000 a year or whatever? Are you actually seeing them they're putting a dollar value to that?
100%. In the hourly and in the salaried arena, I'm seeing them put, okay, here's what you're taking home in dollars, but here's what you're getting that you don't see on that check.
And
yeah,
is there training then to cover that though? Because I think that's the one thing that I've always seen is that employees don't actually always read. You might hand them the piece of paper that breaks it down. They might not actually review it or understand it. And
yeah.
Are you seeing companies actually sit down and have training sessions to go over, here's how to interpret this?
So in the recruiting space is where a lot of this will happen. So it'll be in the recruiting space, and it will also be in community outreach space. So a lot of times you'll hear people talk about let's say they're a forklift operator, for example, and a new warehouse opens down the street who's paying $1 more an hour. So the immediate thought is, okay, let me jump, right? Like let me go and get $40 more a week or whatever that looks like for them. But by doing the front end work, when you hire them and say, okay, like make sure like when you're looking at a company, like you're looking at all of the pieces of this. And I wouldn't say that they're like training them on it, but they're definitely like bulleting it and highlighting it, saying, here's what your compensation really means. And this is, again, like one space where I think companies are doing a really good job. Like they're starting to educate people on what that looks like, and it behooves them to do so.
Yeah, I've seen the supervisors taking on the role of even, coaching the new employees and explaining the benefits. And, you get the memo, you get the HR training, and then you get your boss or your peer that started before you that says, here's how it works for me. And I found this with even stock incentive plans, stock options. Published material was horrible. The onboarding was almost non-existent. It was all peer-to-peer conversation. But in the last 5 years, I saw much better communication coming out of the main office and really showing that benefit and trying to increase participation on day one. I think we were seeing 45% participation on a stock purchase plan, which was giving stock out at 15% discount.
It's fantastic.
And either cash was not, cash flow was a problem, or they just didn't know. But 45% didn't seem like a real high percent. So they realized it, and they said, we've got to even educate our executives and make sure they're aware and they're participating. So, and it goes all the way down the line. So I'm glad you're seeing the trend turn the other way. I just started seeing the trend myself, and I think we still need more.
Yeah, I agree. And also like you know, people want to know that they're being compensated fairly, right? So in that
Yeah.
same example of the guy or person jumping to the new distribution factory, they they want to know that what they're getting paid is comparable to what everyone else is getting paid in the area that they're in, to make sure that they have a compatible living wage in their city. So the more transparent a company can be about that, saying here's how much people are making and here's where you fall in that, the transparency is really key when it comes to that, making sure that they understand where their pay falls.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thomas, it also sounds like as a company, you need to be proactive and get ahead in terms of what's the acceptable living wage for the area that you're in. Get your employees
100%.
to that so they don't try to be that employer that, oh, I can get away with underpaying and still get people in the door. That's not a great long term strategy for retaining and attracting new workers.
It's definitely not. The workforce today is so transient in nature that it's so easy to change jobs and move from one place to another. Again, this has been a long time, like a long time, but the days when like you started at a company when you were 20 and worked there until you retired are, it's basically like non-existent anymore. It just doesn't really happen. It just doesn't really happen. And not that it can't happen, like you can move up in a company and like move places, but very rarely do you hear, a woman say, "Oh, I'm retiring from X and I've been there for 50 years." Whereas probably 20 years ago, you heard that a lot more often.
Yeah. I've only heard it once recently where I know a guy who worked at 3M for 36 years. So
Yeah, they're still out there.
my goals.
I agree. Are you
Perfect.
calling me old, Brian?
No, not at all. You didn't work 50 years there, only 36. So
No. Well, and I went to parties where, in the past I saw 40-year employees,
Hmm.
and the last couple parties I didn't see any.
Yeah.
35, 30 was tops. And then they stopped having parties. So you don't really know. So that just tells you they don't expect people to be there that long. I always believed in lifetime employment, and that's still my generation.
Hmm.
I've met some young people though recently that say, "Boy, wouldn't that be nice if I felt secure, flexible, challenged, trained,
Hmm.
developed? Wouldn't it be great if I had that career path?" And you mentioned that word earlier.
Yep.
There are some people that kind of hang their hat on that. That's really what they're looking for. They're looking
Yeah.
for a career, not a job.
Yeah. 100%. And that's sort of like the third tier of like this conversation that we're having, right? So we're talking flexibility, one, compensation, two, and then training is number three. I don't know how long it's been since you guys have applied for a job or gotten hired at a job, but if you can remember, or if you can think back, if you've ever gotten a job and you showed up and on the first day, they either forgot that you were coming or they didn't know that you were coming at all,
Yes.
right? And so then what happens is you're like, okay, here, Thomas, like I have this new employee, right? And he's going to train with you today. And then here's Thomas, like the operator who doesn't want to do it. And he's, oh gosh, I don't want to train today. And then here we have this new employee, right? Who's, very eager, just got a brand new job and they're stuck with someone who doesn't want to be next to them. So thinking about that and how to like make that experience welcoming and engaging really is like the third piece of this whole conversation. Because if people can't see themselves in what you were just saying, if they can't see themselves in a long-term situation at a company, then they're just not going to be a long-term employee. So you have to give them that in the beginning.
well, Thomas, I'm curious because that we've worked with a ton of manufacturers, and we always hear this story about the folks who leave on the first day at lunchtime,
Hmm.
and it's so common throughout the industry. And I'm curious from your perspective, what have you seen? You bring a new employee, and I think you said welcoming and engaging are the terms you used.
Yeah.
What difference does that experience make for somebody? Like, does it carry forward for a long time? Is it something they remember for a few weeks and then they forget about it? Or is that really, that sets the tone for their employment for career with that company?
It it definitely sets the tone 100%. Like you think about an experience where you're walking into a place where you don't know anybody at all, right? And immediately someone comes up to you and like says hi and they introduce themselves and they say this is who I am and this is what I'm bringing to the table and this is what is available for you here today. That could be a cocktail party, that could be a luncheon, that could be anything. As opposed to if you just walked in, there was no guidance at all, nobody said hello, you didn't know where you were supposed to sit, you didn't know if you could have a drink, you didn't know what to do, and people just kind of expected you to figure it out on your own, you're going to have a terrible experience. Now, there is the possibility that you could force your way in there and like make it a good time on your own, which does happen. Employees do that, right? Like they do just show up and they're just so eager and they're so willing to engage that they just go in and they muscle through. But if you get an employee on day one, call them by their name, show them what you have available for them, tell them the options, show them how they're going to get paid, when they're going to get paid, tell them like what time lunch is going to be, who their mentors can be or who their colleagues can be, who they're going to be working with for the next couple of weeks. All of those things like lessen the anxiety. So when you show up for work on your first day that's not orientation, you already have so much information that you feel comfortable walking into the space. Whereas if you have none of that information, you're immediately very anxious about what you're entering into. You don't know what to expect. You don't know who to talk to. You don't know where the bathroom is. All of these things just add to your anxiety. And if we can take as many of those anxiety inducing instances off of people's plates immediately, you have a much more engaged employee.
That's such a great point because you could just I can recall from my own personal experience the times I go into situations where I don't know what it's going to be like, the unknown, right? That creates that anxiety. And
Hmm.
as you're saying here is you could prepare them ahead of time. But I guess my question for you is like preparing them ahead of time. Is that even before their first day, they're getting information from the company? Like, what are some examples of that?
Yeah. So that line is a little bit tricky because you don't want to give them any work before their first day, right? You want to
No.
make sure that they're compensated for all of their time. You want to make sure they are an employee with you before they start. But letting them know what to expect on that first day definitely is helpful. So you're going to arrive at 7 a.m. You will be leaving at approximately 2:30 p.m. We will have lunch between 12 and 1. All of those things are helpful for people just so they're able to like plan their lives and plan their day. If you just say, okay, and orientation's next Thursday at 7 a.m., and that's the only information they get, they're miserable going into that situation because, again, they have no idea what to expect. They don't know when lunch is. They don't know if they're going to be able to call their kid. They don't know if they're going to be able to have their phone on them in case daycare calls. They don't know anything. So it's just putting them in a situation where they probably don't want to be in. And that's why they walk out at lunchtime because they're like, this is awful.
Yeah, Thomas, I love how you emphasize the people side of this, the bathroom, the key contacts, the cafeteria, the time, the schedule, not just the start time, but the flow of the day. We haven't even talked about the work yet.
Mhm.
The process intimidating. Is the process going to cause fear, anxiety? We're just talking about the people side of the fear and anxiety. I love that. I think that's key. I think we overlook that. Even if you get partnered with the guy you're going to shadow, you're focused on the process. You're not covering all that other stuff that you mentioned. So
Mhm.
I think that's a big bonus if you can get that and get some of it ahead of time.
But 100%, I believe in engaging the employee, letting the process, letting someone else, I guess, take care of the process, right? Uh, we have engineers who can help me make sure the machine is running as fast as it can run. We have engineers who can tell me how many cases per hour I should be getting out of the factory. What I need to be able to bring to the table is an employee who understands what the work situation is going to be like and understand what they're going to bring to the table every day and how they're going to impact the business and what benefit they provide. And then I firmly believe, like, if you provide that employee to the line manager, then they're able to work them into a much better employee than if I haven't given them any of that in the beginning. And also,
Really
like with
solid.
training, they sorry, go ahead.
Nope. Yeah.
Also,
Finish your-
also with training, like they want to know where they're headed. This goes into they want to know things, right? Like they want to know that for the next 4 weeks, I'm going to be in training, and this is what my training is going to look like, and here's who my trainers are going to be. And then if I do well at this in 6 months, I can apply for this job, and then this would be the progression, and then I can apply for this, and then I can move in this direction. This is how I can be the plant manager at some point in my career. So really mapping that out for them and like setting the expectation that it is possible, or it is not only possible, but it is available. That's also a big piece of setting the mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. We had a catchphrase of onboarding of, I mean, the short version was we want you to be safe and productive. And then all the things aligned around those topics. And we started realizing we need to introduce safe, productive, and improving. We wanted them to help improve the work, improve
Yeah.
their workspace, maybe improve the flow through the factory. And I love the fact that you're talking about thinking about their career path. I mean, setting an expectation for improving the career path, setting an expectation for timelines, this probation period and whatever. So there's a lot of other elements that you're introducing here to make a much more comprehensive package.
I think that we overlook new employees a lot when it comes to progression, right? Like when we think about our own careers and we think about like what we want to do, right? We're always thinking about like how do we get to the next level, and how do we, who's going to help us get there, and what do I have to do to get there? How do I move from becoming a manager to becoming a senior manager, or how do I move to becoming a director or a VP, right? We're always thinking about those things. And the hourly employees are thinking about the same things. They're saying, how do I get to the next place? Like, how do I take on more responsibility? How do I learn more things? Like, how do I get promoted? And we have to show them that that's available. And that's true for hourly employees and salaried employees, right? We need to show that there's room for you to grow here.
Yeah, well, Thomas, this kind of really wraps up really nicely into what I've always been fascinated with. When I really got this talking with your group several years ago, is this 4x4 matrix, 4 jobs for every operator, 4 operators for every job. And as we had this conversation today, what I realized is it kind of hits on a lot of these, flexibility, potentially compensation and training. And I'm curious, like compensation, well, I can pay well, I can offer benefits.
Yep.
What other ways can I have an innovative compensation plan? It goes back to your, 4x4 matrix or whatever we want to call it.
Yep.
If you can do you're trained or you've gained these additional skills, we could pay you $1 more per hour, $2 more per hour, like giving them that path to grow. And I'm just kind of curious, is that something that I guess is a foundation that kind of can drive each 3 of these pillars that we're talking about today?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So the training, especially like the 4x4 we were talking about now, a lot of companies now do tie training progression with pay, right? So the more positions inside of the factory, like the higher that wage goes up, the more willing you are to train others how to do what you do. And that happens in a couple of different ways, right? Sometimes folks get paid extra while they're training, and sometimes folks just get paid extra all the time. And it's just understood that they will be a trainer. But yeah, this piece also sets them up for progression, right? As far as like their career goes, like it sets them up of, okay, she knows all of these things now. There's nothing left for her to know if we don't promote her to the next level, and she's ready, right? So these things and you move. And setting that up with them in the beginning, super helpful for their pocketbook, right? Because we're paying them to move. And not every company does that, but I feel like it's pretty safe to say that relative, the more experience you have, the more positions the higher the more money you get. That's pretty standard. But yes, it does kind of all tie into the better trained you are, the better training you receive. the more the other things kind of not take care of themselves, but fall into line a little bit easier.
Yeah, it seems like that's great for the company too, because when you adopt, kind of that philosophy, it forces you to really have a training program that can take somebody who might be working full time on this one position, but then, we're going to spend 1 to 2 hours a day trying to get them some skills in this other
Hmm.
area. And so you have to have a plan for how you're going to do that.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe if you could just talk for that on that topic for a second, like, we've got companies that are wanting to adopt this type of training model where, we do a lot of cross training. How do you effectively do that when you need people to be productive in the job that they were hired for?
Extremely difficult, right? Because even getting people to walk through the door on day one is challenging, right? Like recruiting, like we're hearing it all over the place that like getting people in at recruiting events. Again, even like 5 years ago, I feel like you just there was the job market was so huge that you could just pick and choose whoever you wanted to. And it's not that way anymore, right? Like now you're having to not take what you can get, but there aren't as many options for folks. But the best way to get to that 4x4 model is having a dedicated relief person who their job is literally to go from position to position and relieve somebody for 2 hours or an hour. And maybe that's for a week or 2 weeks or however long it is, and say, okay, I'm taking your position now for 2 hours. You're going to go to this safety orientation, or you're going to go to this hands-on training in this position. And a lot of this stuff like does happen organically as well, right? Like when you're thinking about working a production line and maybe you work on the front of the production line, you naturally pick up what's happening on the back of the production line just because you're there all day. So some of the cross training naturally happens, but to be very prescriptive about it and have a dedicated resource that their entire job is just set aside to make sure that you have relief so people can leave the floor to train is huge. And I don't think that that's an easy thing to get to. I know that that's challenging on many levels. It's challenging on the bottom line. It's challenging on the resources. It's challenging in a lot of ways. But I firmly believe that if you invest the time and the money in your people, they're going to bounce that right back to you.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach, having coverage. Maybe somebody else is working overtime or flexing, and the person that's in the training actually gets a little relief. They don't
Hmm.
feel like they have training and then also take on the overtime at the same time, unless they want to.
Hmm.
But
Yep.
kind of flipping it around and saying, there's two models, either will work. It's going to cost the company a little bit of money, but we're focused on the employee that's in development and we don't want to stress them out.
Hmm.
So I love having that floating person covering or using their overtime to cover for you while you're in training.
Yeah.
It seems a more stress-free approach.
It definitely like limits the time that you're expected to be at work, right? Because then the flex person is just expected to be there for their normal shift, and then everyone else is expected to be there for their normal shift. So no one's expected to stay late or come early to do training, squeeze it in during lunch or whatever. It's dedicated time. Like taking people when they're not ready and putting them in a position, it's it's damaging to the company in so many ways. It's damaging to the employee in so many ways. They're not safe because they don't understand the position well. They're not running the machine well because they don't know how to. So a myriad of things could go wrong, and it's not good for them either because like they're now stuck in a position where they don't know what they're doing. So it's tense and it's stressful to think about like, if I pull the wrong lever or I do the wrong thing, all of a sudden the line's going to stop. And uh, it all goes back to the foundation. If they're not trained, they're not going to do a good job, and they're not going to be safe, and they're not going to produce a quality product, and all the dominoes are going to fall.
And filled with fear and anxiety.
Yes.
And be filled.
And that's the thing. I don't think it's well understood just how, I guess, how difficult that is on employees, because we've seen it for many years now. Like
Hmm.
you just show up on day one, go job shadow Michael. He's been here for 20 years and learn how to do this. And then
Yep.
2 days later, you're out operating that piece of equipment on your own and you just don't feel
Yeah.
comfortable. But that's how a lot of manufacturing has been for a long time, though. Job shadowing it was just the way we did training, and things have started to shift. But I still think that that's a
Mhm.
pretty common way that companies train. It's not purposeful, there's not a lot of intention behind it.
Yeah.
And I guess good question for both of you. Are you guys seeing a significant shift away from that, or is that just still the way it is? And, it's going to be a slow.
I don't think job shadowing is going anywhere, honestly. It's very hard to replicate a 20-year person's knowledge in any sort of training that's off the floor or digital format or any of that, right? I think that like watching someone else do the job is extremely effective. I think that watching someone do the job coupled with good training on that position, and that training could be in a classroom before you go out there, it could be in a digital format, but coupling those things together, the proper training leading into it, and then the job shadowing with a qualified person, and then assessing an employee, right? Like does he or she, do they understand how to do this job? And then having them demonstrate that skill before you're really like, okay, now I can be hands off. I think job shadowing's never going away.
Yeah, definitely not. But I was more referring to that job shadowing where it's, what's the word for it? It's not structured, right? It's
Yeah.
you just show up and
Hopefully that's
uh,
going away.
Oh, that's
hopefully.
quite going. But I agree with
Yes.
Thomas. I saw it today. I had to demonstrate. We kind of talked through side by side, and then I step back and I evaluate. Are they able to do it? I was at a restaurant last night. I had a 20-year veteran. She had a pin. She was the trainer. She was serving me, and she was bringing along a new employee side by side. Very unstructured, obviously, table by table. But I think it's very common in the restaurant industry to do that still. And that translates over to our experience in manufacturing as well. Now, if you get a great person to shadow and he's having a good day,
Yeah.
it actually works. And you described it, the teach back moment, the great attitude. Hey, let me show you a couple of little tricks. I have a secret for you. Let me show you this. But how many employees take that on that way and don't see it as a burden or, you're a nuisance? I think that's part of the problem is we don't have enough of those employees that are good shadow partners.
Yeah. And do they take and are they that good every day? Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes trainers are great, but everyone has off days where they're not great. You know? So that's why I think that the coupling of shadowing and real training, not real training, but coupling and some training goes together better as a strategy than just one or the other.
Or handball. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, Thomas, as we come to a close here, I did have one last question for you. I think
Sure.
training is becoming, I would say it's gaining more and more resources at manufacturing companies is what we're starting to see. And
100%.
there's a lot of young training managers who don't have your experience. And I'm curious, what advice would you give a training manager, to kind of stay ahead of these trends when it comes to the comp side, the training side, the, flexibility side? What are the things they could be doing as a training manager to get ahead of those things?
So I think the biggest thing that you can do, and like something that's helped me tremendously, is by attending recruitment events, right? By interviewing employees, because in those interviews, they tell you what they want by the questions that they ask. Um, they're not going to say, "Oh, I only want to work 8 to 4, Monday through Friday," but they will ask you like, "What are the hours?" They will ask you like, "How flexible is this?" They'll ask you like, "What is the vacation time?" They'll ask you, "How long will I be in training? Will I be forced into overtime?" So they're not gonna ask the question that gets you to the meat of it, but they're gonna ask questions that indicate to you like what they're looking for out of the job. And they're not all gonna be great, right? Like we can't adopt everything that people want today. But like it was only right, only 80 years ago that the 40-hour work week wasn't considered like that. It would never happen. Like there was no way that was ever going to be a thing. So we're going to shift. So that would probably be number one thing is go to the recruitment events and listen to what your people are asking in those events and let that sort of guide you on what people are wanting and expecting. I think a really good piece of advice that someone gave me a long time ago is never leave today unless you're ready for tomorrow. And what they mean by that is like the most minuscule thing, right? Like if you're gonna have water bottles set on the table, set those out the night before. Do anything that you can the day before so that way when they show up, you have time to focus on the people that are in the room and you're not running around trying to set up or get ready or working on, oh, does this presentation work or does it not work? And you're really able to engage them and shake their hand as they're walking in the door and call them by their name and say hello and tell them that you're available for any questions. I really believe that this is where we're headed, is to get a more engaged workforce. We need to be more engaged.
I love it. That is exactly right. They're not cogs in the machine. These are people. These are your most valuable asset. I really like what you're saying here. And
100%.
like you said, call them by their name. Like you should know their name.
Yeah. And in training, like there's always going to be somebody in manufacturing excellence who is going to make sure the machine is running well. Always. There's always going to be a mechanic who's making sure that like it's lubricated and ready to go. But there's not always going to be somebody that says hi to them on day one and make sure that they understand like what's expected of them. So we need to be in that position to where we make them feel that this is where they belong, because they do.
Well, Thomas, that's a really great piece of advice and a great way to wrap up this episode. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing all these insights with us.
Absolutely. It was great talking to you guys.
Yeah, great conversation, great insight, a lot of key takeaways, a lot of bullets. I'm going to go back and make some notes. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Voices of Manufacturing podcast with Brian Salee and Michael Mullenberg. This show is brought to you by Dezuki, the premier digital transformation solution that allows manufacturers to standardize operations. Our website, where you can listen to our episodes and find tons of helpful resources, is dezuki.com. Sign up for our monthly newsletter so you'll be the first to know about new episodes. That's dezuki.com, and join us in creating the front line of the future.